I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to take that exit off the highway. It was late, the kind of late where the world feels like it's asleep, and I was starting to get that drowsy, eyes-heavy feeling that you get on long road trips. It had been hours since I'd seen any sign of civilization, and the gas station I stopped at was the last one for miles. So, I pulled into the small, run-down motel at the side of the road. It was the type of place that looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades, with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that read vacancy. The place looked nearly abandoned, and I could feel my stomach twist with unease. But I was tired, and the promise of a bed and a shower was too much to pass up. I didn't know it yet, but I was walking into something far darker than I could ever have imagined. The clerk behind the counter was a thin, frail man with a face like wax, ashen, worn down by age or something else. His name tag read John. He barely looked up when I walked in, just muttering something about the last room available. He handed me the key without a word and gestured toward the door. "Room 7, he mumbled, like the words were being dragged out of him. "Don't leave the room after dark. The hallways, they're not safe at night." It didn't sit right with me, but I didn't want to argue. I nodded and turned to leave, the heavy weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. As I walked down the dim hallway, the floorboards creaked under my weight, echoing far too loudly in the silence of the motel. The room itself was exactly what you'd expect: a bed, a dresser, a small bathroom with a flickering light. Nothing special, nothing noteworthy. But as I dropped my bag onto the bed and sat down, I felt it, the sense of being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling. It was like eyes were on me from the moment I stepped in. A few minutes passed. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, so I tried to shake it off. But when the knock came at the door, I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the knock was far too deliberate. 1, 2, 3, a pause, then another knock. I stood there for a moment, debating whether I should answer. The knock came again. I approached the door cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. I peered through the peephole and saw nothing but darkness. No figure, no sign of life. The hallway was empty. Just as I was about to pull away from the door, I heard a whisper. "Please, let me in. They're watching me." It was barely a whisper, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My instincts screamed at me to turn away and lock the door. But then, I remembered what the clerk had said: the hallways aren't safe at night. I don't know what possessed me, but I opened the door. There was no one there. Only the stillness of the empty hallway, stretching into darkness. I closed the door quickly, locking it, my hands trembling. I backed away from the door and sat back down on the bed, my heart racing. What the hell had just happened? I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I had imagined it all. But then, I heard something else, a low, raspy sound coming from the other side of the door. The whispering, again, but this time it wasn't as quiet. "Let me in. They know I'm here." It was too much. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel the blood rush to my head. This wasn't normal. There was something wrong with this place. Something was very, very wrong. Suddenly, there was another sound, faint, but distinct: footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps pacing outside my room. Not moving away. They were just there. I didn't know what to do. Should I hide? Should I confront whatever was out there? The only thing I knew for certain was that I wasn't alone. And something was watching me. I was trapped. I don't know how long I sat there, heart thundering in my chest, staring at the door. It felt like time had stopped. Every creak, every rustle in the silence seemed magnified, as though the very walls of the room were holding their breath. Then the footsteps outside stopped. I strained to hear, but the silence was deafening. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I thought maybe it was just my imagination, that I had somehow conjured all of this up in my tired mind. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky beneath me, and moved toward the door. I put my hand on the doorknob, hesitating. There was no rational explanation for any of this. I had to check. I needed to know if I was just being paranoid. With a deep breath, I unlocked the door and pulled it open just a crack, peering into the hallway. Empty. The dim light from the flickering bulbs cast long, distorted shadows on the walls, but there was no one there. The hallway stretched out before me, its end disappearing into the darkness. I stepped into the hallway, feeling the chill of the air. It was colder than it should have been. As I moved down the corridor, the hairs on my neck stood up again. My senses were on edge, like every step I took was being watched. The silence was suffocating, the kind that makes you feel like something is just waiting to pounce. Then I heard it, a soft shuffle. It came from behind me, followed by the faintest breath, like someone was standing too close. I spun around, but no one was there. Just the flickering light overhead and the long stretch of empty hallway. Was I losing my mind? I thought. I stepped back toward my room, my hand reaching for the door, but something caught my eye, a shadow moving at the far end of the hallway. It was barely there, but it was enough to make my stomach flip. It seemed to flicker in and out of sight, as though it was moving just outside the edges of my perception. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't like a normal shadow, it was too wrong. Too still, like it didn't belong. I stepped closer, my eyes fixed on the shadow. It was shaped like a person, but it didn't look like any human I had ever seen. It was twisted, malformed, its features distorted and broken. And then, just as I was about to call out, it stopped moving. The air grew heavier, colder, and I could feel my own breath clouding in front of me. I wasn't alone. Whatever that thing was, it was watching me. I turned and slammed the door behind me, locking it again. My mind was racing, this wasn't just a bad dream. Something in this place was wrong. The clerk's warning came rushing back to me. The hallways aren't safe at night. I backed away from the door, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The shadow wasn't just some trick of the light. It was real. Then the whispering started again, but this time it was louder, closer. It was coming from the walls. From the corners of the room. The sound crawled under my skin, sending chills through my body. Please, let me in. They're coming. I froze. I knew that voice. It was the same voice I had heard earlier, weak, desperate, pleading. But this time, it didn't sound like it was coming from outside the door. It was coming from inside the walls. I tried to tell myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but I knew better now. The walls weren't just old. They were alive with something dark, something that had been here far longer than I had. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door again, this time more frantic, more insistent. 3 sharp raps. I jumped, my heart racing in my chest. I couldn't answer. I couldn't. But I knew, deep down, that if I didn't, it was only a matter of time before whatever was outside found a way in. I grabbed my bag, not sure what I was even planning to do, and ran to the window. The glass was dirty, cracked, and the night outside was pitch black. I couldn't see anything through it, but I could hear the wind picking up, the distant sound of something moving in the dark. There was no escape. And that's when I heard it. A soft scratching, like fingernails against wood, coming from the far corner of the room. I turned toward it, my heart hammering in my chest. There, in the corner of the room, something was moving. Slowly, unnaturally. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But all I could do was watch as it came closer, the scraping sound growing louder with each step. It was coming for me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The thing in the corner, it was real. Every part of me screamed to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. The scraping sound, that sickening, slow grind of something scraping against the floor, was getting louder, closer. It was as if whatever was in that corner was dragging itself toward me. I finally managed to tear my eyes away, heart pounding in my chest. I stumbled backward, crashing into the bed. The room felt smaller, more suffocating with each passing second. I could hear my breath ragged in the silence, each inhale sharp with fear. My hands were trembling, my skin crawling. But then, the air changed. It wasn't just cold anymore, it was frozen. I felt a chill spread from my fingertips all the way down to my toes. I glanced toward the corner again. The thing was no longer a vague shape. It had fully emerged into the dim light, and my stomach turned. It was a figure, but not in any way that could be considered human. Its body was twisted, long, and emaciated. The skin was pale, stretched tight over what could barely be called bones. The fingers were long, claw-like, tipped with nails that looked far too sharp. Its head, its face, was barely a face at all. It was a mass of distorted features, hollow eyes that stared out from under matted hair, a mouth that was too wide, too jagged. And it was smiling. I could feel it watching me, its gaze locking onto mine, and I realized, it knew me. It knew who I was. It knew everything. The whispering started again, only now it wasn't just one voice, it was a chorus of them, all pleading, all desperate. The words were drowned out by the sound of 100 voices crying out at once, all pleading for something I couldn't understand. Please, you have to let me out. Help, it's in the walls, in the walls. Get out of here, it's coming for you too. I felt my mind begin to crack under the weight of it. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, breathing in and out, as if they were alive. The whispers from the walls were growing louder, the figure in the corner slowly stepping closer, its bony limbs moving with an unnatural, jerking motion. In a panic, I bolted toward the door, my hand fumbling to grab the doorknob. I didn't look back, but I could feel it coming, the thing in the corner, its presence pressing against me like a weight. It was too close. I swung the door open, slamming it against the wall. As I stepped into the hallway, I turned to look over my shoulder, and for the first time, I saw it fully. It was standing right behind me, its grotesque face twisted into something that shouldn't exist, smiling wider than a human face should be able to. I screamed and ran, my feet pounding on the old floorboards. But as I rounded the corner of the hallway, something stopped me, something worse than the thing I had just escaped. There, standing at the far end of the corridor, was the man from the front desk. John. But he wasn't the same. His face was expressionless, his eyes wide open, glassy. His mouth hung slightly agape, as though he had been frozen in place. And his hands were covered in something, dark and slick, like oil or blood. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, blocking my way. John. I called, my voice shaking. What the hell is going on here? He didn't answer. I turned and tried to push past him, but as I did, I felt something cold grip my arm. It wasn't his hand. It was something far worse, something cold and smooth, like a serpent's coil. And then I heard it again. That low, raspy whisper, this time it came from John himself, but it wasn't him. You shouldn't have come here. No one who comes here leaves. I wrenched myself free from his grip and bolted past him, the echo of those words hammering through my skull. I reached the exit, threw open the door to the night outside, and stumbled into the cold air. The highway stretched before me, empty and silent. I could hear the faint murmur of voices behind me, calling out from the depths of the motel, from the walls, from the very ground beneath my feet. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them, pressing against me, pulling me back toward the building. And there, at the doorway of the motel, standing in the darkness, was the figure from the corner. The thing with the too wide smile, its eyes locked on me as I turned and ran. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I didn't look back again. I didn't look back until I was miles away. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Because I knew one thing for certain, I hadn't just survived that night, I had escaped. But I don't think I'll ever be truly free. I thought once I got in my car and sped away, that would be the end of it. I could put that nightmare behind me, find a quiet place to forget the horrors of that motel. But I was wrong. The road stretched out before me, empty, devoid of any signs of life. The deep, suffocating silence pressed in from all sides, making me hyper-aware of every sound. The hum of the engine, the wind rustling through the trees, and my own shaky breathing. But there was something more. Something I couldn't escape. As I drove farther down the highway, the weight of the experience began to sink in. My hand still trembled on the wheel, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had seen. That thing in the corner, the twisted figure that had been smiling at me, those eyes, that face, they were burned into my memory. I tried to tell myself that it was just a bad dream. That my tired mind had conjured all of it. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen something. Something real. Then, I heard it. A faint whisper, so soft I almost didn't catch it at first. You shouldn't have left. My blood ran cold. My hands froze on the wheel, my heart skipping a beat. I looked around the car, but there was no one there. No one in the passenger seat. No one in the back. Just the empty road ahead. I could still hear it, though, whispering, faint and raspy, like a voice that was trying to reach me from the other side of a thick fog. You shouldn't have left. We were waiting for you. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, the car surging forward, the road blurring beneath me. But the voice didn't stop. It only grew louder, more insistent. Come back. You have to come back. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. The whispers were getting inside my head, curling into my thoughts, crawling beneath my skin. I knew I couldn't outrun it. It wasn't just a sound, it was inside me now, a part of me. And the feeling of being watched, it never went away. No matter how far I drove, no matter how fast, I could feel it. Something was there, in the shadows, waiting. I swerved onto an empty off-ramp, desperate to escape the voices, desperate to find some kind of refuge, but the road was empty. Every direction led to nothing. The landscape was barren, as if I had driven into some kind of otherworldly space. There were no signs, no landmarks, just me in the empty road. And that's when I saw it. In the rearview mirror, the reflection was faint at first, just a shadow, standing at the edge of the road. But as I drove, it became clearer. The figure was tall, elongated, its body twisting unnaturally. It was the same thing I had seen in that room. The thing that had been in the corner. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. My breath caught in my throat as I stared into the rearview mirror. The figure was getting closer. But it didn't move like a human. It glided, its limbs jerking in an unnatural rhythm, its smile stretching impossibly wide. The darkness around it seemed to pulse, like it was drawing the shadows closer, feeding off the night. I had no choice. I had to get out of there. I threw the car in reverse, tearing backward, my heart racing, eyes fixed on the figure as it came closer. But then, just as I was about to make a sharp turn, I felt something seize the car. The steering wheel jerked out of my control. The engine sputtered. The tires squealed as if they were being dragged through something thick, something alive. The whispers were back. Louder. All around me. It's too late. You shouldn't have left. I slammed my foot on the brake, but it was no use. The car was now sliding backward, as if it were being pulled into the darkness, into the grasp of whatever was behind me. I don't know how long I was trapped like that, but when I finally regained control, the figure was gone. The road was empty. The car sputtered and stalled to a stop. I sat there, my hands still shaking, my breath ragged. I could still hear it. The whispering. We're always watching. Always waiting. That was the last time I ever saw the motel. But I've never truly left it. No matter where I go, I hear those whispers. I see that figure in the shadows. It follows me, always lurking just out of sight, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. I still drive. I try to outrun it, try to forget the nightmare, but I know the truth now. That place, that motel, it never lets go. And the thing that smiled at me in that corner? It's still out there. Waiting. It's been months since that night, but I can't escape it. I tried to forget, to live a normal life, but it's impossible. The whispers still follow me, no matter where I go. It doesn't matter if I'm at home, driving down a quiet road, or even surrounded by people, I can hear them. Come back. They never stop. I tried everything. I went to a therapist, convinced that I was losing my mind. I even went to a different motel, far away from the one on that desolate highway, hoping that somehow, I could find peace. But that only made things worse. Every room I stayed in, I could feel the presence. I could hear it in the walls, in the corners of the room. The whispers. We're waiting for you. It was always the same. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing, the figure with the twisted face, its smile stretching impossibly wide, its long claws creeping toward me. And it always whispered, always beckoned me, pulling me deeper into the dark. I thought I could outrun it. But it was always there, just behind me, just out of sight, lurking in the shadows. And I realized, there was no escaping it. No matter how far I drove, no matter how many miles I put between me and that motel, it would always find me. I began to question everything. Was I cursed? Was I marked by that place? I thought maybe if I returned, if I went back to that motel and confronted whatever was waiting there, I could finally end this. I could face it head-on and put an end to the nightmare once and for all. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I knew that going back would be the worst thing I could do. Still, the temptation was too strong. The pull, the whispers, they were too much. I couldn't ignore them anymore. And so, I did it. I got in my car and drove back to the highway. To that desolate stretch of road where everything had gone wrong. It wasn't easy finding the exit again. The road seemed to shift, to change, as though it didn't want me to return. But somehow, I ended up there, at the same rundown motel, the same flickering neon sign above the door. I felt sick to my stomach as I stepped out of the car, but I knew what had to be done. I walked toward the door, my feet heavy with dread. I walked into the lobby. The air was thick, stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. The clerk, John, was behind the counter again, his eyes vacant, his expression empty. "You came back," he said softly, his voice devoid of emotion. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stood there, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. There was nothing left to say. John handed me the same key. Room 7. The words felt familiar, like an echo from a nightmare. I took it and made my way to the room, my legs shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. When I opened the door, I was hit with the same cold, oppressive air from before. It was like stepping into the same nightmare, a loop that had no end. I couldn't stop myself. I walked to the bed, and I sat down, my mind spinning. The shadows in the room seemed deeper than before. They seemed to move, to shift, as though they were alive. I couldn't breathe. The whispers started again, low and guttural. "Come closer." I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but the voices only grew louder. And that's when I saw it. It started in the corner of the room. The same corner. The same shape. The thing, that figure, twisted and broken, its smile stretched wide. It was real. It was always real. And this time, it wasn't just in the corner. It was everywhere. It was in the walls, in the floor, in the ceiling. It was inside me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body was frozen in place, unable to move. The thing was right in front of me now, its face only inches away. I could feel its cold breath on my skin, hear the grinding of its jagged teeth. "You shouldn't have come back," it whispered. "Now you're ours. Forever." And then, everything went dark. When I woke up, I was outside. The motel was gone. There was nothing but empty road stretching out before me. I looked around in confusion, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been a dream? But then, I saw it. In the distance, the flickering neon sign. Vacancy. It was the same motel. The same road. And I was still trapped in that nightmare, running on an endless loop, forever marked by the thing that had waited for me. And the whispers? They never stopped. "We're always waiting." I didn't know how long I had been driving. The days and nights blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and terror. But one thing was clear, I couldn't outrun it anymore. I had tried. For weeks, I had driven aimlessly, constantly searching for something, anything, that would bring an end to the nightmare. The motel, the whispers, that thing in the corner, it was all still with me. Wherever I went, I could feel it lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to make a mistake. I had tried to tell myself I could leave it behind, that it was just a phase, but it was never that easy. The pull of the place was inescapable. It was like a curse, an invisible chain that tethered me to that one stretch of highway, that one godforsaken motel. I stopped at gas stations, at diners, but they were always the same. Every person I met, every stranger I spoke to, seemed to know something I didn't. Their eyes always held that same emptiness, that same hollow look. It was like they had seen things they couldn't talk about. They were all part of the same sick game. But it wasn't until I came across the old, rusted sign that I knew the truth. I had been here before. The exit appeared before me like a specter from the past, its crooked signs barely visible in the night, the asphalt cracked and overgrown with weeds. It was as if it had always been there, waiting for me. I had driven past it countless times before, but this time I couldn't stop myself. The car turned on its own, as if some unseen force was guiding me back. The motel was there. The same one. The same peeling paint. The same flickering neon. The same cold, oppressive air. I parked the car outside, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't hear the whispers. The voices were silent. But the absence of them was almost worse. I felt their presence, looming behind me, watching, waiting. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the door, feeling the ground beneath my feet tremble slightly. The building itself seemed to be breathing, the walls pulsing with a life of their own. It wasn't real. None of it was. But it didn't matter anymore. I opened the door to the lobby. John was behind the counter again, his face as pale and empty as it had been the first time I saw him. His eyes were fixed on me, but there was something different this time. Something, knowing. "I knew you would come back," he said in a voice that sounded almost like a sigh. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. He knew what was going to happen. He handed me the key to room 7. It was the same key, the same number, the same feeling of dread crawling up my spine. This time, though, I didn't hesitate. I didn't question it. I walked to the room, opened the door, and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of decay, the familiar chill creeping into my bones. The shadows were darker than I remembered. And in the corner, it was waiting. That thing. It was no longer a vague shape, no longer a twisted figure in the dark. It was standing in front of me, its grotesque face inches from mine. Its teeth gleamed in the low light, its eyes burning with something ancient and malevolent. "You shouldn't have come back," it whispered. "Now you belong to us." I stared at it, unable to move, unable to speak. But then, something inside me snapped. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had been running from this for so long, but now I realized the truth. I wasn't supposed to escape. I wasn't supposed to outrun it. I had to face it. I had to end it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, worn-out object I had been carrying with me all this time, the key to the motel. The key that had bound me here, that had brought me back to this cursed place. And I threw it. I threw it straight at the thing. The instant the key left my hand, the room seemed to warp. The walls twisted, the shadows stretched out, and the thing let out a scream, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. And then, the motel began to collapse. The building shook violently as if the very foundation was being ripped apart. I stumbled backward, trying to get out of the room, but the door slammed shut in front of me. The floor cracked open beneath my feet, and I fell. The darkness swallowed me whole. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on the road. The sun was rising in the distance. The motel was gone. The highway was quiet, empty. There was no sign of the place, no sign of that twisted thing. I sat up slowly, looking around. It was over. But as I stood up and dusted myself off, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I looked at the rearview mirror of the car parked beside me, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something moving in the reflection. A shadow. A smile. But then, the image was gone. I drove away, faster this time, never looking back. I knew better than to think I was free. I knew it wasn't over. But this time, I wasn't running. I wasn't looking for an escape. I was just waiting for the next time I'd hear the whisper. You shouldn't have left.